with genetic testing, proteomics, with Ignite. We're just trying to find the right treatment for the right patient so we don't waste time with stuff that doesn't work. Ignite's technology works about 80% of the time, so it appears that it works about 10 times better than any existing technology that's out there.
This podcast is for advisor use only and not to be distributed to the public. The Wealth Consulting Group is an SEC registered investment advisor, and the opinions voiced and contents in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. The economic forecasts set forth in this material may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful.
Welcome to the Bull of Wall Street, and this is going to be a different type of episode that we're recording. It's just going to be me, so Jim and Tally and Paisley are not hosting this with me, but it's around a subject matter that I think a lot of us as financial advisors care about a lot, not just for ourselves and our own families, but for our clients. We touch so many people, as financial advisors. And I think that we have an opportunity as advisors to communicate, different messaging that we think would be important for our clients. And so today's going to be about health and wellness, and in particular around cancer and heart disease. And so our first guest is a personal friend of mine. And before we get into Dr. Schwartz, a little disclosure beyond the normal financial disclosures. We are not giving medical advice. Please seek medical advice from your own physicians, even though we have two physicians on our podcast today. This is not medical advice. It's just for information sharing purposes only. I've been very passionate around cancer and heart disease just because I've had in the last few years a lot of friends and clients and family members and other people that have gone through this and resulting in death. So Dr. Matthew Schwartz, who's a radiation oncologist here with Comprehensive Cancer Centers of Nevada, a dear friend of mine, is also a UNLV faculty member, and also on the board of a company that we're going to be talking about a little bit that has the technology that I'm very interested in. So Dr. Schwartz, here resident in Nevada, actually out here in Henderson with me, named top doctor by Las Vegas Life, medical marvel of Nevada Business Magazine, named him the UNLV College of Science Alumni of the Year 2015, served on the executive committee of the U.S. Oncology Network and Clinical Pathways. Again, a good friend of mine, and I'm very happy to have you on, Doc. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy, for having me on your podcast. I feel honored. Pretty cool.
It's awesome. And it's Doc, it's mostly for financial advisors, and we're trying to make this very casual. And I know you and I have traded some messages around questions and what to talk about. But, cancer, obviously, a lot of us, almost every single person I know has had some experiences with it, whether it's personally themselves or with their family or close friends. And it's obviously something that at least my experience is that it seems like it's happening more and more, instances of cancer that ends up being, like a terminal disease for people. And the subject matter for today, which is proteomics, is something that you and I have talked a lot about because, full disclosure, the doc is on the board of this company, has made his personal investments in this company. So this is not any promotion about the company whatsoever, but more about the technology and what's out there. And I'm fascinated because I think this is something that, people need to know more about. So I guess my first question is the company called Ignite Proteomics, which actually is publicly traded. I know it's a very, very small company, and there's reasons behind why it's publicly traded. But what does it represent? What do they do, and what is proteomics?
Right. So thanks again for having me on. What proteomics is it's the study of proteins versus genomics is like the study of DNA. And the way that the analogy I like to make is, since we're talking about, financial advisors is our segment here is, when you're evaluating a company, for example, you might look at an analyst and look at their forecast of how that company is going to do. That's kind of like what genomics is. It's kind of giving you a forecast based upon a prediction, versus proteomics is actually what's happening. It's like looking at the actual quarterly reports. What was the revenue? What was the profits? That's what proteomics is. Proteomics is what's actually happening, versus like the DNA genomics is what you're going to predict what's going to happen. And they're not always the same thing. They do correlate, but not perfectly. And so what Ignite does, Ignite has a unique patented test that tests multiple or dozens of different proteins in a patient's cancer to know if they're present, if they're turned on, turned off. And what that does is that gives a doctor an exact readout of what drug targets are turned on or off in that particular patient's cancer type. And so it's telling you, it's going to predict which treatments are going to work or not work, is the easiest way to describe
it. And Doc, is it a study of protein rather than what you said earlier? I mean, my assumption, I don't know, I'm not a medical expert whatsoever, but in going through, my own learning around what somebody can do if they actually do have cancer, it seems like if you have a good cancer doctor, that they will, do some sort of genetic testing for you or have you go through it. And then, like you said, that's sort of a forecast to what may work, and that's using your DNA map, right?
Right.
And by the way, let's stop there for a second. I don't know if there's any statistics around this or not, but how often is it that cancer doctors use genetic testing as a protocol? Is it common nowadays, or is it more 50-50 or rare?
It's becoming more common. I think most oncologists are using it for people with advanced cancer, but we're starting to see it more and more being done up front. For example, women with breast cancer will often get genetic testing to see if they have something called the BRCA mutation, because it kind of changes what the treatment paradigm is. The most, the most famous example would be like Angelina Jolie. She was positive for the BRCA gene, and so she ended up electing to do a mastectomy instead of doing a lumpectomy and radiation. So it kind of changed what she did. So we're seeing it more and more, and that's great. But we definitely have a ways to go, because it takes time for doctors to change the way that we practice, and that's happening now in real time. So the good news is, we have new technologies such as DNA testing. We have new technologies such as proteomics with Ignite. We just got to get the word out, both with patients and their families and with doctors, so that they start using it more. Because
so it sounds like, it's not like an automatic that somebody even gets a genetic test done, and it's more of a forecast, as you said. But let's talk more about the technology and how it actually works with proteomics. Because I think what you told me is it's the actual study of the actual cancer and the protein in the cancer. Is that correct?
That's right. So what proteomics using the Ignite test does is it takes the patient's cancer cells that we already have. So for example, if a patient comes in with breast cancer, there's either some kind of biopsy or surgery that's done, and then that tissue is sent to a lab, and the lab analyzes. That's how you know that you have cancer. And what Ignite does is it takes those specimens that we already have, and it runs this special test to determine which proteins are turned off or on in that patient's cancer, using tissue that we already have.
That's amazing. And so I know, since you have...
Go ahead.
Well, go ahead, please.
Like you say, it doesn't require any additional testing. There's no more blood tests or going for any additional biopsies or what have you. When a doctor orders Ignite, it's all done on the back end on stuff that we already have.
Yes, and because I know, since I've been talking to you about this technology for a few years now, you've shared with me some studies from leading clinical researchers out there, and so this technology has been around for a while. And so my next question is, why is it? It sounds amazing, groundbreaking. Why is it that not so many physicians are actually ordering these tests? And we'll get into the cost and how that works later. But why is it that it's not, something that's well known today and used commonly?
Sure. So, just a little background. The technology is being used by almost every major cancer center in this country. They're using it in their clinical trials to try to determine, what's going to be the future of cancer care. So, the top oncologists like in the world are probably using it, but it takes time for that to get down into the clinic and into the community, let's say. And so the reason why it takes time is that's how kind of medicine works. A new innovation will come, and it takes time for studies to come out showing that it works. It takes time for guidelines to be changed, and it takes time for doctors to change their practice patterns. And so it's a process. It takes years, and we're in the middle of that process now. That's the good news. And happy to come on podcasts like this to kind of help get the word out so that, number one, patients are aware that it exists. Number two, hoping that they have something that they can talk to their doctor about that may help them.
I know that you can't make any claims about how effective this test is or not, but just generally speaking, big picture, Doc, how effective are the results? I guess my next questions are, how does it actually work? We'll get into how maybe a doctor or a patient could go through the process of ordering these tests, how it's paid for, et cetera, the business side of it. But how effective is it in your opinion relative to what's out there today?
So just to give you a background, the typical next generation sequencing DNA test, which is just a fancy word for that's how we're kind of testing cancer DNA now, find something that you can do something with, which we call an actionable finding, in about 8% of patients overall. And in my experience, Ignite's technology works about 80% of the time. So it appears that it works about 10 times better than any existing technology that's out there. And the early studies so far that are being published tend to support that. And so the word's not completely out there. There's a lot of studies out there that are being done right now in major cancer centers such as Vanderbilt. They're doing at Dana-Farber, and those studies are being done right now as we speak to prove that. But the early data is supporting that, and that kind of correlates with what I'm seeing in the clinic. We get a result with a finding that we can actually do something about 80% of the time.
That's amazing. So how does someone go about ordering this test, whether it's a patient advocate, and or their doctor?
Right. So the good news is it's actually super easy. And so if a patient has advanced or metastatic breast cancer, this test is available. It's actually covered by Medicare. And they would basically ask their doctor if they think that they're a good candidate for the test. And the doctor then would fill out a requisition form. It's a single-page form filled out by the doctor, basically putting all the patient's information. And then once that's sent to Ignite does the rest. So all the rest is done on the back end, where Ignite then gets the tissue samples from the pathology lab, then runs the test, then comes out with a report that basically tells the doctor, it lists which proteins are turned off and on, tells the doctor which drugs are predicted to work or not, and a result that can give them findings that they could do something with. And so a lot of times those findings are drugs that maybe the patient's already on or that are commercially available, but sometimes they're actually findings that are only available on a clinical trial. And Ignite's report also will match patients to potential clinical trials they could enroll in if they're interested.
That's amazing. So I know you said that it is covered via Medicare for breast cancer, which obviously is a huge market. But Ignite, from what I understand, also will do the test for not just breast cancer, but for everything that's not covered by Medicare, and do it for free. Is that correct still? That there's no cost to the patient or the doctor to do it?
So that brings up a good point. This technology that Ignite runs on, it's called RPPA. RPPA was developed by a guy named Dr. Patrick Coyne, and he used to run the NIH. Anyways, this technology works for every cancer type. And so that's where I see this going in the future is that it's probably going to roll out to other cancer types and eventually all cancer types. So the technology works for every type of cancer. But the current indication is for breast cancer, and the reason being is that's where we have the most data now, and that's where it's covered by Medicare. And then it takes time as more and more doctors use the test for, private insurance companies to cover it. So that's going to take some time, as well as for it to get on national standard guidelines. Once that happens, then the test will be covered more by private insurance companies. As far as using it for other cancers, whether the company's going to do it for free, I don't believe that they do now. I think it's a research use only, and I think that there is a cost involved, but I believe it's kind of like what the cost is for the company to run the test. I don't know what that number actually is, but if somebody's really interested in it, feel free to reach out to Ignite, and they can give you more information on the cost structure for non-breast cancer patients.
Okay, we'll probably add a link to our podcast. Yeah, we'll probably add a link to the podcast notes for people that are interested in contacting the company and researching that. And I think the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is Matt. I had a wife of a very dear friend of mine's brother, who I know as well very well, who's passed now. And then also the daughter of one of my best friends who's passed now. And one or two other examples, a personal friend of mine from a few years ago. And all of them, I tried to get to take this test, especially when it was for sure, no cost to anybody, for whatever cancer they had. But what I've learned, and I'm sure you can talk about this a lot, is unless you're someone, if you've been diagnosed with cancer, I think psychologically it's so difficult for people to take action beyond what their cancer doctor has them do. None of them took the free test to see if there was a medicine out there that would work better for themselves, And so that's why I think this awareness is so important, that advocates, family members, other people, because if you're the actual patient, my experience with, and I just want you to comment on it, is that they're psychologically, emotionally so in such a strange place that it's hard for them to take action beyond what just the doctor is doing for them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I see it every day because this is what I do for a living. I get it. Trust me. And my own family's been through cancer. I just lost my mom a couple of years ago to lung cancer. I totally get it. That's why this is on the doctors. So the doctors need to take that burden from the patients, and we've got to be thinking outside the box. So when a patient has, cancer and our standard treatments are working, we got to be looking at, hey, what other options are out there? And Ignite should be right at the top of that list, because you have nothing to lose. The test could give you, potential information and tell you what could work, and you literally have nothing to lose by ordering this test, because why wouldn't you do it if you could save a life? And the story I like to tell is that the bad news is, I agree with you, it does seem like we're finding more cancer now, and I think that's a combination of, number one, we're lucky enough to live longer. Number two, we're looking for it more with screening tests. But the flip side of that is that now that we have better treatments available for patients, we're keeping people alive longer. So I have patients now with metastatic cancer that when I came out of training 20 years ago, I would have said, you get your affairs in order, you probably have 6 months to live. Now I have patients with metastatic cancer that have been alive for a decade, and they go to work and they're fine. And they're like, what do I do now? And I'm like, I guess call me if you have a problem. It can happen. I don't want to give people false hope, but it is possible now to make cancer a chronic disease. It is possible now to have stage 4 cancer and be alive for many, many years, if not decades, and die from something else. And so that's the goal, is that we're trying to give people more time and have better quality of life. And Ignite is one of the best ways to do that, because it's going to find you, what the right treatment is. And that treatment may not be some heavy duty chemo. It may be some super targeted treatment, or it may be some immunotherapy where it helps your immune system clear the cancer. And so it just kind of helps you know what to do, and so you don't waste time with treatments that don't work.
Wow. One last thing, I imagine that with the use of AI now and filtering into the healthcare industry, that companies like Ignite and other companies are doing these groundbreaking, not just research, but have products that are out there that are being used and being either researched and or in clinical trials or actually approved by the FDA. I think there's a lot of hope in sight, but not so far out, maybe even, right here. Like one of the companies I want to also talk about, again, this is just sharing information, but my health insurance company covers a test that detects cancer cells very early before their symptoms. I know that you and I talked about this before, but the GRAIL test, GARIL test, from another publicly traded company, from the stock symbol, something different, but the GRAIL test, a lot of people know about too, can detect some of the, from what I understand, cancer cells very early before there's real symptoms. And from what I understand from my friend that works there, is that it does a good job on the most aggressive cancers and does actually a pretty good job on identifying where it's at in the body too. So it seems like this whole industry that you're in for so long in your profession is going through this time period where the outcomes could look a lot different here soon. And any final comments?
Yeah, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. It's all about finding the right treatment for the right patient at the right time. And when you do, it could be a home run. And so that's what we're trying to do. This is precision oncology with genetic testing, proteomics with Ignite. We're just trying to find the right treatment for the right patient so we don't waste time with stuff that doesn't work. Why waste time? Why risk side effects on ineffective treatments? Let's do the right treatment at the right time. And that's the name of the game.
We got our second guest on here, and I am super, super excited. Dr. Thomas Dayspring. He is in my opinion, from what all my research tells me, the world number one expert on lipids. And I first became aware about Dr. Dayspring listening to Dr. Peter Attia's very popular podcast, The Drive. And since then, I've listened to probably, 10 hours of Dr. Dayspring talking about his expertise with on other interviews. And so I'm fascinated because, what we're going to be talking about, cardiovascular disease, is something that's always been in the back of my mind because my father had a quadruple bypass when he was 65. Fortunately, he's still alive at 89. And it's the thing that is the biggest concern for me personally. And so I want to get proactive for my own health. But as financial advisors, as I mentioned earlier with Dr. Schwartz, we have a platform to talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of people within our network. And as a national firm of our size with a lot of reach, we want to make sure that our clients are aware of this and what they can do. And so to give a little bit of a better backdrop for Dr. Dayspring, I've got his bio here, but he, again, I believe is the world's foremost expert on this subject on lipids. He's a fellow of both the American College of Physicians and the National Lipid Association. In 2011, he got the award for service from that organization, NLA. 23 from the Foundation of NLA Clinical Educator Award, for butchering that. He is currently working as an educator on lipids with Dr. Attia's company, Early Medical, which thanks to you, Dr. Dayspring, I think I'm going to become a patient of and to be part of that program. And, just for people that don't know, and Dr. Dayspring can talk about this, but according to the, WHO, CVD, cardiovascular disease, and this is the latest, I guess, full year they had the study, but in 22, they said that 19.88 million people throughout the world estimated passed away from this disease, of which accounted for 32% of the global deaths. And about 85% of that is from heart attack and stroke. And I've listened to Dr. Dayspring talk to Dr. Attia about, 40% of the time you've got this, you learn that you have this issue is when you have that heart attack. And then according to that same, website, let's say around 18 million people a year or so pass away from this. And then, among this disease, about 85% is due to this, it's hard for me to say it, atherosclerotic, disease. And it amounts for ASCVD, I guess, amounts for more than all the combined deaths of cancer, the number 2 cause of death, all forms of cancer, and accidental deaths, number 3. So, ASCVD, I'm very interested about it. And so this is, again, I've listened to so many of your podcasts where you guys are talking about medical terms that go way over my head. But with that being said, talk to us about this and why we need to know about this, because from my understanding, it's something that we could actually prevent or fix.
Yes. Well, number one, thanks for having me, Jimmy, and putting me in front of an audience that oftentimes don't hear folks like me and everything. And as Peter would call this, atherosclerotic deaths are so unnecessary. It is by far the leading preventable chronic disease death that humans can get. So it is absurd to see anybody prior to the age of 80 dying of atherosclerotic heart disease. I mean, sooner or later, we're all going to die of something. But why die of something that is 100% preventable in all but the rarest individual or so? But the problem is you cannot prevent what you do not know is going on in you. And atherosclerosis is a silent killer. Almost 50% of people find out about atherosclerosis when they drop dead. So obviously you can't prevent it after that. And the others get some symptoms, but the symptoms are not excruciating. They're not horrendous. Many don't even go in for checkups, and they're putting on with symptoms, and then they drop dead too, or the symptoms get so bad that, like your dad, they wind up getting a bypass or something. You should never have to undergo a bypass like your dad if you're getting the proper cardiovascular risk assessment, and if any abnormalities are ascertained. It is such a treatable disease with incredibly safe therapeutics nowadays. So that's the little story. By the way, I do want to correct. I prance around in the lipid world pretty good, but I am not the world's top lipidologist by any means. I'll give that title to the people who are doing all the tremendous research and publications on this. I read it, study it, and then I teach everybody else. So put me a little bit into a better perspective. I'm maybe the best communicator.
I have so much respect for Peter. If he says you are, then to me you are. And I know you've done thousands and thousands of lectures, taught hundreds of CE courses, and it's amazing because when the longevity stuff came in years ago, I remember I did a calcium test personally a long, long time ago. It was over a decade ago for sure. And I know that medicine and technology, especially around this subject with people like yourself, from that time frame till now, I mean, not only can you find it, you can treat it, right? So talk to us about that. Talk to us about, how somebody becomes, like, what should we be doing? Let's say we have no symptoms. What should every person be doing in terms of awareness before they get the problem?
Just a little bit of background so your audience understands what atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease is. Atherosclerosis is the buildup of cholesterol in the walls of your arteries. Arteries are blood vessels that carry blood, oxygen, nutrients from the heart to every organ in your body. And then those nutrients and oxygen are extracted and the blood comes back to the lungs and heart through veins. But it's the arteries that kill us, because the arteries that are delivering blood and nutrients to our heart, and you want your heart to keep pumping, and that heart requires a lot of oxygen and a lot of energy, fatty acids or glucose, as does your brain. Everybody probably knows if you tie off circulation to the brain, you're dead in 4 minutes. Your brain is shot dead. So you got to keep that circulation going. But if atherosclerosis, the buildup of cholesterol, occurs in the arteries over time, and it takes a long time to build up, either those arteries narrow down, compromising the delivery of blood and the nutrients to the various organs, or what more commonly happens is the cholesterol is in the wall of the artery. It's not obstructing blood flow through the artery to whatever organ. But that cholesterol causes a type of inflammation, and it's like a volcano. Boom, it bursts. And if it bursts, then it interacts with your bloodstream. It sets off the coagulation system, which forms a clot. And it's the sudden development of a clot that partially or totally closes off the artery, delivering blood to a given tissue. The medical term for a partial clot where a little bit of blood flow still gets through is called ischemia. And the medical term for a total blockage where no blood can get through, and therefore that part of the organ dies, is called infarction. A heart attack, myocardial infarction, is the medical term. So the only way not to suffer these consequences is to have no cholesterol in your artery wall. And that is the causal agent of atherosclerosis. Now, the next question would be, well, how in the world does cholesterol get into the artery wall? The artery walls are not overproducing or synthesizing cholesterol. That does not happen. So being a New Jersey guy all my life, I always joke I'm an expert in illegal dumping coming from that state, especially the northeast corner of that state. Something is delivering cholesterol to the artery wall. Now, cholesterol is in a group of molecules called lipids. And the definition of a lipid is it's an organic molecule that is not soluble in water. Well, your blood consists virtually of plasma. Plasma is water. So lipids cannot circulate in water. Nobody has lipids floating around their plasma as free molecules. But lipids have to travel from here, there, to everywhere in your body. So I often say evolution had to devise a lipid transportation vehicle to carry water-insoluble lipids like cholesterol through your bloodstream to wherever they're going. And evolution said that's easy. Proteins are soluble in water. So if we just take a group of lipids, an oil droplet, and wrap it with a protein, we have developed a water-soluble lipid transportation vehicle. So follow me. You take a group of lipids and you wrap it with a protein. Now we have this lipid transportation vehicle that is called a lipo or a lipoprotein. Lipoprotein is the proper term. So that's how lipids are going in your bloodstream. So if you measure a cholesterol level, it could be total cholesterol, the cholesterol in all those lipoproteins. It could be LDL cholesterol, low-density cholesterol, high-density cholesterol. You're evaluating the weight of the cholesterol molecules in the various particles, and that's what you're measuring in the bloodstream. There's no free cholesterol floating in your bloodstream. So a little bit of further education. Those lipoprotein vehicles, those dump trucks carrying lipids, there's two family of them, and they're defined by their structural protein on their surface. So one group of lipoproteins has a protein called apolipoprotein A1 on it, capital A-1. And actually, there's 3 or 4 of those ApoA1 proteins on it. They originally were called our alpha lipoproteins. They're now called our high-density lipoproteins. And everybody has heard of HDL cholesterol, which would refer to the weight of all the cholesterol molecules in all of your HDLs in about 3 ounces of your bloodstream. Now, they're not usually the problem. The big problem is the other group of lipoproteins, which are characterized by a structural protein called apolipoprotein B, capital B, ApoB for short. And the cool thing is there is one ApoB peptide on every ApoB lipoprotein. So if you and I measure ApoB in our bloodstream, we're counting the number of ApoB particles. A little bit more education, and then all of this is going to make sense once you know the basics. That ApoB family basically consists of 2 different lipoproteins. One is called very low density, and the other is called low density, VLDL and LDL. And they were first discovered in a centrifuge. You know, if you take serum and you put it in this ultracentrifuge and you spin it, they separate by their buoyancy or density. And the very low density lipoproteins float, and the lower density lipoproteins sink. The high density sink right to the bottom of the tube. What determines sinkage in an ultracentrifuge is the lipid content. The more lipids you have, you float. The less lipids you have, you sink. So VLDLs obviously carry more lipids than LDLs, except VLDLs don't carry much cholesterol. They carry triglycerides, another lipid we'll talk about. LDLs carry much less triglycerides, but mostly cholesterol. So they are the predominant cholesterol-carrying ApoB particle in our plasma. There is something called plasma residence time. Once the liver secretes these particles into your bloodstream, how long do they last before they're catabolized? The VLDLs, 4-6 hours. LDLs float around your blood for 3 to 5 days. So if we measure ApoB, you really are counting VLDLs plus LDLs, but 95% of them are LDLs. So ApoB is really an LDL particle count. All right, now that you know that, so if I measure ApoB in you and it's high, you basically have too many LDL, low-density lipoproteins, cruising around your plasma for several days. All right, so what determines whether an ApoB particle, unlike an ApoA1 particle, can crash your artery wall and dump the cholesterol in the artery wall? It's particle number, which is why ApoB is the single best blood test a human being can do on themselves if they want to know, am I at risk for atherosclerosis? Once your ApoB, the LDL particle concentration, exceeds a certain threshold, they're going in. They're crashing the artery wall. They get stuck there. White blood cells gobble them up, and that's how you form plaque. But the plaque takes years, if not decades, to develop. This is why kids are not dropping dead of heart attacks, even though a lot of kids have risk factors, but it takes 20, 30, 40 years for enough particles to crash their artery wall to cause sufficient plaque that will give them the infarction, the ischemia, blah, blah, blah. So this is why we now have invented a term primordial prevention. If we start doing a blood test much earlier in life, looking solely at ApoB, we would say, hey, teenager, hey, 8-year-old, hey, 25-year-old, you have too many ApoB particles and they are going to take you down at a certain point in your life. And, you know, you mentioned my buddy Peter. We're in the business of promoting longevity. We don't want you to have a heart attack in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or even 70s, for God's sakes. I'm 79. I haven't yet had a heart attack. And I, for a long time, had too many ApoB particles. Now I'm on successful therapy for that. Thank God, before I ever did have a darn heart attack. Had therapies been around for your dad, and he would have had an ApoB checked a bit of time before he had his bypass, we would have known, oh my God, Mr. Lee, you're going to drop dead, or you're going to need a bypass or something, or you're going to survive a heart attack with a damaged heart. And we could have instituted measures to lower ApoB. Now, we have those measures today. We have the ApoB blood test today. They are newer comers to the scene, so he probably did not have that type of testing or even the treatments we have today available to him. So it's an illegal dump job of cholesterol in your artery wall by ApoB particles. If we would just all start measuring ApoB early in life, then we could jump in and do what we call primordial prevention. Not wait for your coronary calcium test to start glowing, or your CT angiogram to start glowing, or God forbid I meet you in the CCU, you survived whatever happened to you. Why wait till then when this is totally preventable? And I'm speaking to the investment community. And most of those folks, you know what an ApoB test costs? If you had to pay cash for it, it's $20. It's not like a $2,000 test, for God's sakes, available in every lab in America, well standardized, far better standardized than the LDL cholesterol measure, which everybody is doing on themselves. So this is so pathetic. So again, in the financial community, I'm sure all your listeners are doing very well. They surely want to live to 80, 90 so they can share their wealth with all their little grandkids or great-grandkids or even their children. Why pass it on to them in a will because you died prematurely? So this is why you told me it's the number one killer in all but the most primitive countries where infectious disease gets people and everything. This is so sad. So it's ApoB. We can discuss so many attributes of this. And remember, cholesterol in your bloodstream, which is where we're measuring it, hurts nobody. That's just floating around. It only hurts you when the particles carrying cholesterol crashes your artery wall. And that's driven by particle number. And LDL cholesterol measures, which everybody looks about, often correlates with ApoB, but in many cases it does not. And that's the tragedy. You can have a perfect LDL cholesterol and a high ApoB or vice versa.
I learned that yesterday, listening to another interview that you did. And before we get to treatment options, if you have a high number, I want to ask maybe a little more education. So, it's interesting about cholesterol. I learned from one of your interviews that you said, cholesterol is not all bad necessarily, right? It's when it becomes bad. Like, for example, our brain needs cholesterol, and I guess we get our brain forms all the cholesterol we need as a child. That being said, on this LP little a, that was interesting to me. Can you talk to us about that and what that means in conjunction with what you just said?
Yes. Just to follow up to what you just said, there is no human life without cholesterol molecules. Every cell in your body, not only the brain, but your liver cells, your kidney cells, your nose cells, your eyeball cells, all have a surface made up of what is called the cell membrane. And that cell membrane is solid cholesterol plus another lipid called phospholipids. And it's the cell membrane that regulates the health of the interior of the cell. So you must have the proper amount of cholesterol and phospholipids in your cell membrane. And this is why evolution has made sure every single cell in your body has the power to de novo synthesize cholesterol from scratch, because we cannot live with a cholesterol deficiency. But we have no way of measuring the cholesterol in your cells or my cells. We measure cholesterol in the blood, which has nothing to do with the cholesterol that is in the cells and the cell membranes of your body. And that's where you go wrong. We put too much emphasis on the cholesterol floating in the bloodstream instead of counting the particles carrying that. Now, with respect to that, to answer your subsequent question on something called lipoprotein little a, I've already introduced you to the ApoB containing particles and the ApoA1 containing lipoproteins, the HDLs and the LDLs. But as always in medicine, it always gets a little more complicated, because what's helping us form everything I've talked about so far is what genes you inherit. The genes influence the production of cholesterol, the body's regulation of cholesterol. If you have too much cholesterol, if all your genes are working right, you can get rid of it real quickly by yourself by transferring it to your gut, which could be excreted in the stool. But of course, who's got the perfect genotype? Very few of us or so. So there's always some genes at play. Two of the worst genes one can inherit, and it's what we call a codominant inheritance. So all our genes are made up of one from mom and one from dad. Each gene is called an allele. So each gene is a biallelic structure that tells various cells, make this protein or don't make that protein. And the proteins are what do everything. Proteins are all the enzymes in our body that regulate everything. So there is a particularly horrendous lipoprotein that you only will have if either your mom or your dad passed on what is called the apoprotein little a. I've already taught you about apoprotein capital A. That's on your HDL particles. So there's another protein called apoprotein small case. It's not a capital. It's a lowercase a. And that's because either mom or dad passed on a little ApoA gene to you. And it only takes one. I mean, both parents could do it, and you'll have high LP little a, but it only takes one parent to send your apoprotein little a concentration through the roof. Now, the only organ in the body that makes this apoprotein little a is the liver. So if you or I, and thank God I haven't because I've been tested for lipoprotein little a, but if we had a patient who has elevated lipoprotein little a, we know either their mom or their dad or both passed on the ApoA gene to them, and that travels to the liver. It's only expressed in the liver, that gene, and your liver would start producing a peptide, a protein called apoprotein little a. Now, to show you how common this is, 4 out of 5 people have inherited that gene. That means there are billions of people walking the planet Earth right now who have high lipoprotein little a, and they don't know it because maybe 1% of humans have ever been tested for this. It's a readily available test in every lab in America and most of the civilized countries in the world. Now, not only is you can inherit those genes, but it's influenced tremendously by race and ethnicity. So Caucasians, it's 1 out of 5 people will have a high LP little a level. And in a moment, I'll tell you what that means. 4 out of 5 do not. But again, 1 out of 5 people in the world, we're talking billions of people. In the African American community, it's almost 1 out of 2 people have it. And now we're starting to understand why African Americans have so much atherosclerotic coronary heart disease. Women, it's 4 out of 5, Caucasian women. Asian Indians and other parts of Southeast Asia, it's almost not quite as bad as the African Americans, but a much higher incidence of this. It is a major cause of atherosclerosis in India, in that continent over there. So, what is apoprotein little a? Now, your liver is the site that produces these ApoB particles that I've educated you on already. So if your liver is also producing apoprotein little a, as the liver is forming an LDL particle, an ApoB particle, some of the ApoA little a jumps on the LDL particle. And once that marriage occurs, you have changed an LDL into something called lipoprotein little a. It's really an LDL particle that is contaminated by this usurper protein called apoprotein little a. And then your liver secretes it into the bloodstream. And if we start measuring it, it's at what we know is an abnormal level. So all of the guidelines now say every human being needs a lipoprotein little a, and that's called LP little a as an abbreviation, needs that test once in their life. Because it's genetically inherited. You have it, you have it. It's not going to go away. So you don't have to keep repeating it to see what's going on with it. And if it's above a certain well-defined levels, we know, oh my God, we were worried about your LDL or your ApoB. Now we're triply worried about you because you're carrying the most common genetic lipoprotein that can result in atherosclerotic heart disease. And why is it more dangerous than an LDL or an ApoB LDL particle? And studies have shown if I took a regular LDL particle and an LP little a particle, the LP little a is over 6 times more atherogenic than the LDL particle. So if both of them are crashing the artery wall, the LP little a is going to do damage a lot sooner and a lot worse than the LDL particles because it takes not as many LP little a particles to create that. And it's a simple reason that apoprotein little a is a sink. It binds to what we call oxidized lipids. People should know oxidized means you're on fire. Firefighters know every time you see a flame, something is being oxidized, wood, whatever, gasoline. So oxidation, you don't want oxidized lipids floating into your cell because they're way more dangerous lipids. So apoprotein little a may have evolved as a garbage truck to pick up oxidized lipids and get them out of your body. But for whatever reason, we don't even know how to get rid of LP little a particles right now. So if and we probably have a lot more oxidized lipids in our plasma now than we did when we were evolving because of all the junk we're eating and the improper lifestyle we are subjecting our bodies to over time. You have basically an ApoB LDL particle that has a general alarm fire going on in it. So if that jumps into the artery wall, it sets off atherogenesis much sooner than would the LDL particles over time. And this is why when we're taught that, hey, if somebody does show up with a heart attack at age 20 or 30, or if it's a kid with a stroke, the first blood test you should do is lipoprotein little a because it's a big cause of premature atherosclerotic heart disease. And as if that's not bad enough, those LP little a particles can invade the major heart valve in your heart. Heart has 4 valves, but the most important one is when your major chamber, the left ventricle pumps, blood flows through the aortic valve out into your aorta and then goes where it has to go. So the aortic valve is the most critical valve in the heart. LP little a particles have the ability to crash that aortic valve and cause it to calcify and become narrowed, screwing up the function of your aortic valve, which leads to all sorts of cardiovascular complications, including heart failure and things you don't want to know about. So, my God, this LP little a particle is filling up the CCU with premature atherosclerosis, and it's also filling up the cardiac surgeons reason for replacing the aortic valve now. It's either the second or third most common cause of people who require aortic valve replacement. And you know what? And I don't want to denigrate anybody, but I would bet most cardiovascular surgeons who replace valves are only in their infancy learning about Lp(a). This stat has been known for 20 years. So we're starting to catch up, but it's still, I would say the average practitioner in the United States, most of the cardiologists in the United States do not know what Lp(a) is and are not testing for it. And that's not Dayspring saying this. They're published in all the circulation Journal of the American Cardiology, the stats showing why is nobody testing for Lp(a) when, again, we can do things to prevent the manifestations of Lp(a) havoc.
Can you repeat the statistics again on how many people actually have Lp(a) that acquire that?
A generalization is 1 out of 5 globally. But if you start separating by ethnicity and race, African Americans by far the worst, Asian Indians and other aspects of Southeastern Asia, they're the second most. Women would be the third most, and white men would be and they're still 1 out of 5. Listen, who doesn't have 5 people working in their office? One of them has high Lp(a), for God's sakes, and they don't know it if they're not being tested. Wow. And I said ApoB is a $20 test. If you had to pay cash for an Lp(a), it might be $90. Wow. And if you have insurance, most of the third-party carriers are paying for it nowadays.
So going back to my personal story, my father, not too long ago, so way after his quadruple bypass, had an aortic aneurysm. It didn't bust, and so he's still alive. But somebody that has those types of symptoms, obviously, there's blockage going on in their arteries, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, an aneurysm is, if it's aortic aneurysm, that's the biggest artery in the body. So it takes a lot longer to get an aortic aneurysm than it does. Your coronary arteries are among the smallest in the body. But just to scare people, and I like to do it because maybe they'll run out and get these tests. I told you it's a plaque rupture that causes a clot in your artery. The size of a clot that will occlude the biggest coronary artery is a pencil dot. That's how big the clot is that will shut off those very small arteries. So it's not like you need a clot. It would take a gigantic clot to close off your aorta. But look, if you have atherosclerosis in any arterial bed, you have them in all. But the ones that are going to manifest are the smallest, the brain and the heart. Yep.
So how about treatment? Let's talk about that. And I think statins, I've heard Dr. Peter Attia talk about that a little bit in some new research around it, but just about treatment. If somebody has, high ApoB, they've got the Lp(a) gene, what do you do?
Well, Lp(a) is totally different, so we'll talk about that later. But for the run-of-the-mill high ApoB, not complicated by Lp(a), you basically have to restore the ApoB concentration to what is normal, or better yet, even physiologic levels, because we know people with physiologic ApoB concentrations go through life with getting no heart attacks. So ideally, that's, if you could wish for a certain ApoB, you'd want to be in that physiologic range. Now, if you have high ApoB, there's only one way in the year 2025 that we can reduce that. And we have to tell our liver, hey, liver, clear the plasma of the excess number of ApoB particles. That's called hepatic clearance of ApoB. So how in the world would the liver do that? The liver manufactures a receptor that's called an LDL receptor. It really should be called an ApoB receptor. And it's like people of my age, maybe some of the younger kids who saw the movie The Addams Family, they know the Addams Family had a little box contraption on their table, and out of it came a hand. And that hand was called Thing. And Thing would do things. It'd wave to people and do things. So think of an LDL receptor as the thing coming out of a liver. So if a liver makes an LDL receptor, it sticks out of the liver cells and reaches into the plasma. Now, the LDL receptor is engineered to recognize and bind to anything that has ApoB on it. So if an LDL particle is floating near an LDL receptor, it grabs it and it pulls it into the liver where the particle gets catabolized. Obviously, if you're pulling ApoB LDL particles out of plasma, that's one less that can crash your artery wall. So the more LDL receptors that we can entice the liver to manufacture and express, the greater will be your clearance of the ApoB particles, and you will significantly drop whatever ApoB concentration you have. If it's only a little bit up, it's easy to normalize. If you're in the stratosphere, the treatment is going to be more aggressive to normalize it. And there are a few people, mostly genetic issues, where it's so high, we could significantly restore it, but you can't even make it where you wish you could. But there are a minority of people out there, and they really inherited some bad genes. So it's upregulation of LDL receptors to induce clearance of ApoB particles. So it's very easy to do. Step one is always lifestyle suggestions to a person. Hey, here's what you can do to your particular lifestyle to enhance clearance of LDL receptor mediated clearance of ApoB particles. And the simplest first line step is always reduce saturated fat in your diet. Saturated fat stops your liver from producing the proper number of LDL receptors. Without LDL receptors, you're going to have terrible clearance of ApoB particles. Your number is going to be high. And this is why probably the single most dietary factor associated with heart disease is saturated fat. Interestingly, the monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fat don't have that attribute of screwing up LDL receptors. And this is why most dietitians will switch the type of fat that you're eating in your diet. You have to eat fat, but you don't need to eat saturated fat. It serves no purpose. If your body needs saturated fat for a few things, it can de novo synthesize it. You don't need to be eating saturated fat. So you will see most of the diets where people have the highest ApoB levels are something called the ketotic diet, where they're drowning themselves with saturated fat, or the carnivore diet, where because of all their meats, they're just eating way too much saturated fat. So if you're on a carnivore diet, you've got to check your ApoB tomorrow, for God's sakes. And if it's high, you have to make a decision. I'll transform to a different type of diet. Maybe I'll find lean meats that don't have as much saturated fat, blah, blah, blah. Talk to a nutritionist, which isn't me. They will give you all sorts of guidance of how to eliminate saturated fat in your diet. And if you're a carnivore who says, no, I'm eating the fattiest type of meats, then I got 3 drugs I'm going to have to prescribe for you to try and get your ApoB down. So the choice is yours. So that's the number one. The number 2 thing is the development of something called insulin resistance, which is a precursor to prediabetes and diabetes, which is basically epidemic in the civilized world nowadays. My goodness, even if you look in pediatric populations, when I was growing up as a doctor back in the late 60s and 70s, there were no such thing as fat children. They were rare. Nowadays, you go to any kindergarten school, I bet half of the class you see little chubby kids walking around, and they already are insulin resistant at that stage of the game. So what happens when you're insulin resistant, you start increasing a different type of lipid called triglycerides. But triglycerides, in association with insulin resistance, screw up those LDL receptors, and you have decreased clearance of the ApoB particles, or they delay the catabolism of your ApoB particles. So saturated fat, high on the list, insulin resistance, even before you're a pre-diabetic or a diabetic, is cause number 2. And the rest would be various genetic causes. If you came to me and you had a high ApoB and you didn't have diabetes or pre-diabetes and you weren't pigging out on saturated fat, you do a simple genotype and you would find certain genes that are explaining why your liver is not clearing these LDL receptors. But they pale if you put them up against the type of saturated fat in the diet and the incidence of diabetes or pre-diabetes nowadays. So that's whatever the cause is, you do it. Now, suppose you go on a therapeutic lifestyle as recommended by a nutritionist who knows what they're doing, And most physicians are not well trained in nutrition. So, and this is why doctors usually give you a silly one-page printout of a diet to take. They never discuss it with you. And you go home and you throw that one page in the garbage. Nobody pays attention to it. You really need proper nutritional health. And it's available in a lot of places, even virtually nowadays, for goodness sake. So there's no reason not to understand the proper lifestyle. And make sure, though, it's what the American Heart Association, the National Lipid Association, the American Diabetes Association, the European Atherosclerosis Society recommends in their nutritional documents. Don't go to some nut job on the internet and find out who's telling you saturated fat is not dangerous or anything. That is playing Russian roulette with the wrong weapon. So if nutrition does not get your ApoB to a satisfactory level, then you have to start thinking about pharmacological control. And listen, the 4 drugs we now use to lower ApoB, if necessary, and they're not necessary in everybody, statins have been around for 38 years, prescribed to untold millions of people, have more clinical trials than any drug in the history of the world, attesting to not only their efficacy, but their safety. The second most commonly used drug is a cholesterol absorption inhibitor called ezetimibe. When it was branded, it was sold as Zetia. Now it's a generic drug, also like statins. Has been around 23 years, been prescribed to millions of people. Almost no safety data adversity has ever shown up with that. If those 2 don't work, then you get into the howitzers of the world, the newer drugs, and the most potent one we have is called a PCSK9 inhibitor. You don't have to know what PCSK9 stands for. It would look like a big Greek or a bunch of Greek words to everybody. But they are our most potent ApoB lowering drug. Little bit of a downside. They have to be injected every 2 weeks. Little tiny auto pen. You don't even feel the needle. You need a magnifying glass to see. And there is another newer PCSK9 where you only have to inject it every 6 months for people who would like to have less frequent injections to lower their ApoB. So they're out there. But they came on the market, I think, in around 2016 or so. Incredibly expensive. They've since lost a lot of their costs. But if you had a cash pay for them now, typically it's going to be around $6,000 a year. Third-party payers will only pay for them typically if you have a demonstrated genetic ApoB disorder, or you have already had a heart attack, a bypass, a stent, or you have clear genetic abnormalities attesting to your genetic cause of your high ApoB or LDL cholesterol. Even then, they would want you to try a statin or statin plus ezetimibe to see, could I control my ApoB that way? And if you can, they will not agree to an ApoB. Now, that is softening. In the past, that required a lot of pre-certification. Doctors got to get on the phone and beg some insurance company to cover it. With the most commonly used one, which is called Repatha, I understand that at least 50% of the third-party payers no longer require pre-certification. They just need a doctor to attest that this patient needs it. So it's getting easier. But again, without them paying for it, it's going to cost you a few bucks. I often joke when I see people contact me all the time. They're often 30-year-old guys who, like you, had some dropped dead early of a heart attack, or they're very worried about uncles and grandpas who died prematurely. So they know it's in their genes, and they want to know what to take. And they're typically the ones who are going to require PCSK9 inhibitors. But I say to them, listen, this is a financial decision an individual has to make. The vast majority of people, and of course there's a hell of a lot of people who not, let's face it, what don't we waste $6,000 a year on with all sorts of garbage that we're buying that we don't need? So if you really are told you need a PCSK9 inhibitor to solve your issue, I bet at least middle class and certainly financial consultants can easily scrape up $6,000 a year to buy that drug if they can't get it covered. For the poor people of the world, unfortunately, that is not the case. And They're taking so many people off the Medicaid rolls now. This is gonna increase cardiovascular morbidity and mortality because they're doing that. But anyway, so the first line treatment is to make the liver express LDL receptors. And you do that by depleting the liver of its cholesterol pool. And you do that by inhibiting liver synthesis of cholesterol, or you do that by inhibiting intestinal absorption of cholesterol, which is delivered to the liver. If all of a sudden the liver is not getting cholesterol because we've prescribed a synthesis inhibitor like a statin, or there's a newer one called bempedoic acid, also expensive, so most people use statins, or if we block intestinal absorption with the ezetimibe, our liver has a cholesterol deficiency. The liver says, no big deal. I'll just manufacture more LDL receptors and I'll clear all those ApoB particles carrying cholesterol, and the liver replenishes the cholesterol it needs. Liver does a lot of things with cholesterol that only it can do. So that's how statins, that's how ezetimibe, they cause increased expression of LDL receptors. We enhance clearance of ApoB particles, and you either bring your level down to normal or a lot closer to normal. If one drug doesn't get you to normal, you go to 2 drugs. If 2 drugs doesn't get you to normal, you go to 3 drugs. In the rarest of cases, the genetic issues, and even this is rare, you might even have to use all 4 of our current drugs. That's not very common. And to be honest with you, if the run-of-the-mill doctor is not getting ApoB to goal with 2, or even the 3, the PCSK9 inhibitors, which are so easy to use, there's no reason to need a specialist to get that drug. But if you have to go beyond 3 drugs, you should punt to a lipidologist or somebody with great expertise in lipid and lipoprotein management. But that's going to be a small minority of people, to be honest with you. So that's the therapeutic treatment. Peter will tell you, I believe he's going to have something coming out on statins again soon, because the team has been writing some things. He puts out a weekly email. He puts out his podcast. So Peter is always educating on lipids. That chapter 6 in his book, Outlive, is totally devoted to lipids. Again, he will make the mistake. It's an error. He uses a lot of adjectives. I'll keep it polite here. It's a totally unnecessary death to die of high ApoB nowadays. It's just an enforced error that a human being is making, not to test ApoB and not to normalize it if it comes back as abnormal, because you're heading down the wrong path. You may not die next year of your heart attack, but you're going to die. You're not going to make it to where he wants you in that Centurion Olympics that he wants everybody to play in. Get to 100 and then see what you can do. And get to 70, 80, 90 and still have a heart pump that works, so crucial. So he will tell you what levels you have to get it down to also.
So these treatments, if you already have plaque, what does it actually do to the plaque? Is it reversing it? Is it possible?
Here's what you do. And we got more trials than we can count. The statins have dozens and dozens of trials. The other drugs have 2, 3, 4 trials attesting to their efficacy. But the truth is now, lower ApoB, there are no heart attacks if you lower it enough. So, and it really doesn't matter what drug you use. The reason statins are so commonly used, and ezetimibe second, was they're cheap, they're generic. The branded drugs start to cost you a lot of money. So look, if they were all generic, I think everybody would be put on a PCSK9 inhibitor, except for the most trivial of cases, because that's the easiest way to blow away ApoB. But at $6,000 a year, that's not going to be your first-line drug for many people. Statins are basically free if you have third-party insurance, as is ezetimibe. They're generic. Maybe you have to pay a $5 copay or something. So there's no reason not to use them. So, and many people will start a statin first, and if you don't get to goal, then they would add ezetimibe to it. And it'd be unusual not to get to goal, but there will be some outliers there who have some underlying, either they're totally ignoring nutrition, or for the most part, they got some genes at play that are making it more difficult to control ApoB. You got to get into more and more combination therapy. If you listen to any of Peter's podcasts, you will know if he decides to use a statin in anybody, he uses the smallest dose of statin that one can use. guidelines are still recommending high-intensity statins. I call them the gorilla statins. That means not only the more potent statins, but the highest possible dose that is manufactured. And that's because trials that are now 20, 25 years old showed the efficacy of the high-potency statins. But that was before we had any of the other drugs available to us. So back in the day, yes, you had to use high-potency statins. But nowadays, write this down, listeners. If you take baby statin and you add ezetimibe to it, that gives you the same ApoB lowering as the highest dose of a given statin, and the side effects are considerably less. Not that there are a lot of side effects with statins, but there are a few worth mentioning. So baby statin plus ezetimibe, it's an unusual patient. You can't get the ApoB goal nowadays. And there's 2 generic drugs and incredibly safe. Ezetimibe, there's almost nothing you have to do on the blood to follow up. With statins, people know, oh, they cause diabetes. Yeah, and 0.2% of people taking statins their glucose may start to inch up a little bit. Now, to be called a pre-diabetic, your glucose has to be at 100 milligrams per deciliter. To be diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic, your glucose has to be 126 milligrams per deciliter. So if your glucose is 97, I can't call you pre-diabetic. But if you went on a statin, 0.2% of people would go to a glucose of 102. Trust me, a glucose of 102 is no more dangerous than a glucose of 98. Even a glucose of 98 is too high, to be honest with you, if you listen to Peter. So, and now if say you're a pre-diabetic and your glucose is 108, you go on a statin, your glucose may go to 114. Some will go above 126, but it does nothing to worsening your diabetic outcomes. So the American Diabetes Association wants every diabetic age of 40 and above to be on a statin, regardless of what it might be doing to your glucose, because what kills most diabetics? Heart attacks and strokes. So the benefit so outweighs this minor risk of minuscule glucose perturbations, which can easily be controlled by stepping up the lifestyle or adjusting your diabetic medication, that it's such a non-issue. But if you will go on the internet, they got you thinking statins are putting everybody into diabetic coma, for God's sakes. No. It's something everybody who's on a statin, however often they're getting their blood checked, 3 times a year, twice a year, once a year, you'll always repeat the glucose level, and you will see if that's happening, and then it can be addressed. And what are the other things with statins? A very small minority do get muscle aches or muscle weakness, and that is definitely a limiting factor. Again, I think it's 3% of people in trials that have properly looked at this. Look, I practiced 37 years and have had more than 3% of people come back and say, oh, I've got aches and pains now, my finger is hurting me. 90% of them have nothing to do with the statin, but it's tough to convince a person that that's not true. So in general, nowadays, we'll move on to a different drug other than a statin. Interesting that bempedoic acid, which inhibits cholesterol synthesis like a statin, does not cause muscle aches, so that's an alternative, and is FDA approved to use for somebody who cannot tolerate a statin because of muscle aches. So you might at least get coverage from a third-party payer there. So there's just so much exaggeration of these side effects with statins. But they're there. But a doctor should know this and will monitor.
So does the lower ApoB levels mean that the progression of the plaque has kind of stopped, or does that actually mean that it's being reduced?
Yeah, so here's what remember, the reason we prescribe these things is not to make plaque. It took your plaque 20, 30, 40 years to get there. We could reverse it, believe it or not, but it's probably going to take another 10, 15, 20 years to do that. But the reason we give you these drugs is you see a virtually within 1 to 2 to 3 years, depending on how serious your ApoB is, dramatic reductions in heart attacks, strokes, stents, bypasses, angina pectoris, putting you in the hospital. That's chest pain. So that's what these drugs do. Who cares what they're doing to your plaque? But we do have the answer to that question. And we know it from what are very sophisticated angiographic trials or imaging trials. So researchers have taken people with coronary disease and they see, oh my God, look at the volume of the plaque in your artery wall. And we're going to start you on various therapies. And a year or two later, we're going to repeat the image and we're going to see, is any of the plaque, it's called regressing, is the plaque shrinking? And here's what we know. You will drastically reduce the events almost immediately by any reduction of ApoB. And that's really why you're taking these drugs. The overwhelming majority of people are going to die with atherosclerosis in their arteries, but it didn't kill them because the plaque didn't rupture and cause the event. So if you really believe I want to do an angiogram in a year or two and not see any plaque, or I want to see a lot less plaque, you just have to blow away the ApoB far more aggressively than you do to reduce the incidence of heart attacks, bypasses, and strokes. And I presume at a certain point you're going to ask me what numbers should we be achieving, and then re-ask this question, and I'll tell you what ApoB levels you should get it down to if you are one who's praying your plaque disappears, instead of one saying, Tom, just tell me you've done what you can do that I'm not going to have a heart attack.
Okay, so what does that number need to be? And then if you have a low number, would you still recommend somebody get one of these scans? And what type of scans? Like, this calcium test, the full body scans, and so talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's see what level, and then what do you do from there?
And cardiology is certainly inventing more and more ways to image various parts of our body, including our arteries. But anyway, we know through decades, going back to post-World War II, starting with the Framingham Heart Study in this country and any number of epidemiologic and clinical trials since then, we know what ApoB, or if you're measuring LDL cholesterol, what LDL cholesterol should be in healthy people, and at what levels of those metrics do we start to see an increased incidence of heart attacks and bypasses, blah, 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 or coronary heart death. So we look at something called population percentile ranges. So if we say we measured ApoB or LDL cholesterol in 10,000 people, there's going to be one person who's going to have the lowest value that the lab has determined, and there's going to be some poor soul who has the highest value of the lab. Everybody else is going to be in between. It's basically a bell-shaped curve. Most people are going to be right in the middle. The people who are at higher risk are going to be to the right of the middle of that bell-shaped curve, and the people with lower risk are going to be in the left. But now let's take those numbers and put them into deciles. Remember, the middle of that curve would be the 50th percentile. You don't want to live in the 50th percentile of ApoB because a lot of people are going to get heart attacks. So what is the percentile at which we start to see significantly less major adverse cardiovascular events? It's an ApoB or an LDL cholesterol below the 20th percentile. What is the level if you're born with? It's virtually impossible for you to ever have atherosclerosis, and that would be below the 5th percentile of what we measure in the population. And to be there, you have to have a genetic gift from God that you're either not making ApoB particles or your body is clearing them right away so they never build up in your body. All right. Now, of course, high risk is defined as the 60th percentile, the 80th percentile or above. And nightmare risk is defined as like the 95th percentile or above. To me, those things are totally outdated to be using those now. I would consider risk starting above the 20th percentile, pretty serious risk starting above the 30th or 40th percentile, and anything above that, you need to consult somebody about primordial prevention. So unless you're saying, I only want to live to be 40 or 50, I don't care about Peter Attia as he wants to get me to 80 or 90, then ignore your lipids for God's sakes. Unless you have Lp(a), you probably will live that at least to the 50s or 40s, So if that's your goal in life, fine. Most of us, I think, are saner than that and would like some degree of longevity. So you can keep appreciating your family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, whatever, even your loved one. If you don't have kids, wouldn't you love your spouse to live as well up into the 90s as long as you're both functional, of course. All right. So what are the numbers that are the 20th percentile for LDL cholesterol or ApoB? With LDL cholesterol, it's right around 80 milligrams per deciliter or a little above. But since LDL cholesterol does not always agree with ApoB, I would say stop doing LDL cholesterol. Just get ApoB. The 20th percentile is 70 milligrams per deciliter. So that's where the run-of-the-mill American could be. Unless you tell me you're a smoker, you have high blood pressure, you're a diabetic, you have a strong family history of heart disease, you have high Lp(a), you got some other genetic issue, then I want you under the 5th percentile. And for sure, if you've already had a stroke or a heart attack. So what is the 5th percentile of LDL cholesterol? 55. What is the 5th percentile of ApoB? 50. Just 2 weeks ago, the European Atherosclerosis Society issued new guidelines, and for what they call the very, very high-risk people, they pronounced an LDL-C should be under 40. And the ApoB should likewise be well under 40 in that person too. So an astute person would say, Tom, wait a minute. If my LDL cholesterol is that low, or if my ApoB, which is counting the particles that are delivering cholesterol, I'm going to be in a cholesterol deficient state. Is that healthy? Where's my brain going to get cholesterol? Where are my kidneys going to get cholesterol? Where are my adrenal cortex that makes cortisone going to get cholesterol? Where are my gonads that make estrogen or testosterone going to get cholesterol if you're making it so low in the bloodstream? Good question, but a very silly or simple answer. Number one, I've alluded to a little bit. There are some people who picked the right moms and dads, and they inherited the genes where they don't make very many ApoB particles, or they clear them very rapidly. They go through life with LDL cholesterol and ApoB well under 50. That is called hypo-beta lipoproteinemia. Remember, the ApoB are the beta lipoproteins. So if you don't have too many ApoB particles, you have hypo-beta lipoproteinemia. The average American has hyper-beta lipoproteinemia, which is why they get so much heart disease. But here's the good news. Those people whose LDL cholesterol and ApoB is perfect the day they're born to the day they die, not only do not get any heart attacks, they do not have any cholesterol-related deficiency. And this goes back to, I think I said it earlier in the podcast, evolution has gifted every cell in your body to make all the cholesterol molecules that cells need. So your adrenal gland, your gonads, your brain does not need any delivery of cholesterol that's carried in a lipoprotein in your plasma. This is why the guidelines are telling you to make your LDL-C 40 and 50 in the high-risk category, because they know you're not possibly hurting any other cell in your body, which if they need cholesterol, they'll do what they always do. They just keep synthesizing it. So for people who think I'm going to screw up my gonads, the guys got to have their testosterone shots. You may need testosterone if you have a testosterone deficiency, but it has zero to do with the cholesterol that is being measured in your bloodstream. Nobody's measuring cholesterol in their gonads or their adrenal gland, which makes all that it needs. Just a quick aside, if for some reason, and it's more the adrenal cortex that the gonads needed cholesterol in an emergency, because HDLs help fight infections and everything, HDL particles supply the adrenal gland with cholesterol, not LDLs. So making LDL cholesterol 10 or 15 does nothing to the adrenal cortex or gonads. And when you drop LDL cholesterol, you're typically not dropping HDL cholesterol to any dangerous level. That would be below 20 milligrams per deciliter. So there's just so much fallacy out there. Again, you Google it, you're going to see the internet nut jobs telling you you're screwing up your adrenal gland or your gonads. But finally, I want to get to the brain, because everybody's, and you'd be shocked how many doctors are telling patients this. I don't want to lower your ApoB or LDL cholesterol too much because your brain needs cholesterol. It's the most cholesterol-rich organ in the human body. You alluded to it because you've listened to some of the appropriate podcasts. Starting when you're in your mom's uterus and continuing the day after you're born, the brain is in what we call form thrust, producing cholesterol like there's no tomorrow. Finally, by about the age of 10, brain growth stops. You've developed an adult-sized brain. And then the brain synthesis of cholesterol has to dramatically reduce itself because the half-life of a cholesterol molecule in the brain is 5 years. The half-life of a cholesterol molecule floating around your plasma is 3 to 4 days. And it gets recycled there. But your brain, once it makes a cholesterol molecule, it keeps it forever. If a half-life is 5 years, some cholesterol molecules are lasting up to 35 years. So there still is some ongoing cholesterol synthesis in the brain, but it's incredibly minimal. And no brain cell, the lipoprotein particles carrying cholesterol, LDLs, HDLs, VLDLs, cannot cross what is called the blood-brain barrier. It's a little membrane that separates the brain from the bloodstream. And so no LDL can, even if you have LDLs carrying no cholesterol, the brain could care less. It says, we don't care. We're making all the cholesterol they need. So you can't hurt your brain by drastically reducing ApoB or LDL cholesterol.
So once you take that Lp(a) test once in your life and you get your ApoB tested, at what point do you think scans are appropriate for anyone to take?
All right, but first, should I tell you what the Lp(a) goals are, or you want me to?
No,
let me tell you that before we get into imaging. So for people who have high Lp(a), right now, there's only one drug on the market that can a little bit lower your Lp(a) concentration, and that's those PCSK9 inhibitors I spoke about. They can drop it by 25 to 30%. Now, genetic studies have suggested that's not going to be enough to save you from Lp(a), but maybe it'll help a little bit. Who knows? Right now, several very potent Lp(a) drugs are in clinical trials that will pretty much reduce it by 80 to 90%. What those drugs do is they will stop your liver from listening to the LPA gene you inherited, and you will not be able to produce apoprotein A anymore. So your Lp(a) concentration will normalize in virtually everybody. Now, there's probably 5 or 6 drugs in development right now. The first one, we may finally get outcome evidence next year on if it's working or not. They all work by affecting the genes, the RNA that affects your synthesis of apoprotein A in the liver. And there are different ways you can inhibit RNA. They only inhibit the RNA that's involved with the production of ApoA, not any other type of RNA in your body, just like the vaccines you're hearing about now, which only prevent you from developing your white cells from forming one type of protein. You're not with vaccines nor with the new Lp(a) drugs affecting every other RNA, of which we have thousands of different types of RNAs in our body. So you're hindering none of that. So anyway, those drugs, and here's fingers crossed, if they work, and by work means they have to show they do reduce heart attacks, strokes, bypasses, blah, 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 stents, and they have to do so safely. There is no adverse signal to the drugs. If they have a downside, it's unlikely they're going to be allowed to come on the market by the FDA. So we will see, fingers crossed on that. And if the first one fails, it's going to put a damper. Maybe some of the second and third ones will still continue because they're a little bit different. But let's hope they work. Let's say, worst case scenario, they don't work. Then I think what Lp(a) is a non-treatable risk factor. But right now, Lp(a) is a non-treatable risk factor other than a little bit of reductions with a PCSK9 inhibitor. So what do the guidelines tell us to do to reduce these major adverse cardiovascular events in Lp(a) patients? They tell us blow ApoB away. Get rid of the LDL particles that are not carrying apoprotein A. And that is the overwhelming majority of your LDL particles. Lp(a) particles, as terrible as they are, they're a very minority LDL particle. You have many, many more regular LDL particles than you have Lp(a) particles. So if we just get rid of the regular LDL particles, you certainly can reduce some of the adversity generated by LP little a. Maybe not totally eliminate it, but right now that's what you can do. And the guidelines would also suggest not only lowering ApoB, treat every other cardiovascular risk factor that you've measured. Healthy heart lifestyle, lose weight, stop smoking, get your blood pressure under scrupulous control, all of those things. Other biomarkers that we sometimes look at, like homocysteine, omega-3 levels in the blood, things like that. So you just treat everything else but LP little a, but you've got to blow away ApoB. So the scenario, somebody comes to me and they look healthy. Maybe I even image him and I don't see plaque yet, but maybe grandpa died early, dad had a bypass early. I'm worried about them because they have the same high LP little a that likely their ancestors high, who were probably not tested for it because the tests weren't around back then and very few people are getting tested. Then we just blow away ApoB. So if I have two people with, say, a little bit elevated ApoB, LDL cholesterol, one has high LP little a, one does not, I blow away ApoB much more aggressively in the person carrying the high LP little a. And that's where I shoot for under the 50 milligrams per deciliter layer. If you actually have atherosclerosis and high LP little a, boy, that's somebody. We actually have a clinical trial that would attest to you want your ApoB to be 30 in that case, and you better be on a PCSK9 inhibitor in that unusual scenario. So that's how we treat LP little a. Lifestyle, lowering ApoB with whatever it takes, statins, ezetimibe, if you needed a PCSK9. But if you've already had your bypass, stent, you name it, LP little a, some other unusual genetic lipid disorder, you just blow away ApoB more aggressively.
Got it. So I got two final questions. I think we got about 10 minutes. So based on listening to what you just said, if you have high ApoB, let's say you've got LP little a, then a keto diet is probably not something that's not smart for you. Would that be correct to say? You wouldn't recommend that?
No, it depends. We have more definitive data on that now as to is that a problem for everybody or not so. Those who go on the ketogenic diet typically do so because they're obese. They may be showing signs of early diabetes, pre-diabetes, or they may have high triglycerides. And they go on this super high saturated, they're sucking butter cubes down all day long, and they go on that diet, and their triglycerides goes down to normal, their glucose improves. Depending on how many calories they're taking in, some of them do lose weight, and they're very happy. But in about 80% of them, ApoB, LDL cholesterol starts going up, up, up. Sometimes a bit, sometimes into the stratosphere. So you got two choices to make now. I'm going to ignore all the 50 years of data that tell us LDL cholesterol and ApoB is the causal agent of atherosclerosis. I'm going to ignore all that research, just like the vaccine deniers deny the vaccine stuff. And I'm going to listen to my internet buddy here who claims don't worry about ApoB or high LDL cholesterol. And if we're in America, you're free to do anything you want. So if you make that decision, oh, I'm happy, I'm a little thinner, my trigs are normal, I don't have high glucose anymore, I say you are playing Russian roulette. Yes, those two parameters look normal, but the single biggest cause of the leading global cause of morbidity and mortality, ApoB, LDL cholesterol, is now not only a little bit high, it's well above the 95th to 99th percentile. You want to play that game? And so they did a silly study recently. They said, well, we're going to do an imaging study, a CT angiogram, very sophisticated look at their arteries, and we're going to put people on this diet and send their ApoB through the roof. And a few years later, we're going to do another angiogram and see, did the plaque get worse? And they've been kowtowing and lying about it. They finally published their data. Actually, the plaque did get a little worse in a very short amount of time. Remember, I told you it takes atherosclerosis 20, 30, 40 years to develop? Right. Within 3 to 4 years, you're seeing their plaque volume increase. Good God, that's like high-speed rushing to the CCU. Now, none of them are going to die in the next 10 years, probably, but are they going to ever see longevity? Nobody's ever going to do that study. I doubt it.
Before I get to the last question, which is just about awareness, why the medical community or heart doctors or just in general, we're not addressing this more as a number one killer in human beings. Before I get there, if somebody's got good cholesterol, HDL, it's high, but they've got high ApoB and LDLs, that's still not good, right?
I'm glad you asked me that. There is no such thing as good or bad cholesterol. Those are idiotic terms that date back 50 years to when they first were discovering these metrics. You see, cholesterol is in every lipoprotein in your plasma. LDLs carry cholesterol, HDLs carry cholesterol, VLDLs carry cholesterol. Now, follow me here. HDLs are the one lipoprotein. Our body initially produces very eensy-weensy tiny HDL particles, and they go around and any cell that has too much cholesterol, which will kill the cell, has the ability to get rid of cholesterol by pumping it out. But it has to pump it out into an acceptor, and the acceptors are the baby HDL particles, apoprotein A, capital A1. So HDLs start to fill up with cholesterol, and they get bigger, 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 and finally they're full of cholesterol. Then they have to get rid of their cholesterol. And you know how they get rid of it? They could return it to the liver and dump it, and some of them do that. The most common way for an HDL, after it's filled up with cholesterol, to get cholesterol back to the liver is it bumps into the LDL. And it says, LDL, I'm going to share my cholesterol with you. It actually enlarges a protein on its surface that becomes erect, and it's called cholesterol ester transfer protein. So here's the HDL. You see the little erect CETP protein? Here's the LDL. Boom, they start having intercourse. The HDL sends its cholesterol over to an LDL, and it's the LDL that returns the cholesterol to your liver. So 50% of what was originally called reverse cholesterol transport is done by LDLs. Yes, HDLs pulled it out of your cells. Thank you, HDLs. But they immediately gave it to the LDLs, which return it to the liver. And for years, we've been told LDL cholesterol is the bad cholesterol. Half of the cholesterol in an LDL came from an HDL. So you tell me, when an HDL sends a cholesterol molecule, good cholesterol, to an LDL, does that good cholesterol suddenly become bad? That's an absurdity. Those are old, outdated terms, and anybody using them needs to go back and do a remedial course in lipidology. Any reporter using those words, any educator using those words, it's an embarrassment if they're still using them. So there is no such thing. I just did a tutorial on HDLs for doctors. For years, initially, the guidelines tell us low HDL cholesterol is a big risk factor. In the last 50 years, never, ever has there been a guideline telling doctors, oh, you have to raise HDL cholesterol. They just said low HDL cholesterol might be a risk factor. Yet every doctor and nutritionist and layman in America thinks, if I don't raise my HDL cholesterol, my good cholesterol, I'm going to die. Every single guideline has taken HDL cholesterol out of the guidelines. There never has been a goal of therapy. There never will be. The most recent two guidelines don't even mention HDL cholesterol anymore. So, folks, stop looking at your HDL cholesterol other than on day one, if you're not on drugs, if it's low, immediately request an ApoB level, because most people with low HDL cholesterol who are going to get a heart attack, their ApoB is through the roof. All those early studies that said low HDL cholesterol is bad were not checking ApoB, and that would have told them. HDL cholesterol just hangs around with high ApoB if it's low. So don't worry about your HDL cholesterol. It has nothing to do with anything. HDLs are very important, but it has to do with other attributes of the HDL called HDL functionality. We have no blood tests of HDL functionality. HDL cholesterol has no correlation with HDL functionality.
Well, I think you answered my question, which is, it sounds like the education around what your expertise is, it's just not, it's relatively would say new, but it's something that just awareness needs to go up. And I'm glad that you're, first of all, thank goodness. Thank you so much for participating in the podcast. Thank goodness for you and for Dr. Attia and other professionals that are, making this much more known. And, the fact that the number one killer in both men and women combined more than cancer and accidental death is something preventable, something that you can treat, something, it's just phenomenal. I really appreciate it. And is there anything that you'd like to say that we haven't covered before we finish off here?
Yeah, and the reason why you people are listening to me and say, where did he pull this guy out of? I've never heard this from any physician. Starting in medical school, lipids are not taught of a serious, they're still teaching 1972 lipids to people. If you go into internal medicine, and cardiologists are internists before they become cardiologists, neurologists, zero lipid education. You might learn about lipids in your residency if you self-study. You're not getting formal teaching on lipids. So it is pathetically under education of practicing clinicians. They're all going on stuff what these old professors who should have retired 30 years ago are still telling them, and they're still promulgating nonsense. Women are still being told they're protected because their HDL cholesterol is high. Download any women's guidelines and notice that is not mentioned. But yet the average woman is told, don't worry about your ApoB, your LDL cholesterol, your HDL is protecting you. We need so much more education. The reason I have been asked, and I don't do them anymore other than virtually, to do the 4,000 lectures all over the globe, is doctors often walk out of a room by me, Tom, you've taught me things I've never heard from anybody else before. And then they go home and they start reading the literature on it and they say, my God, he was spilling the truth. So so listen, you had on a cancer specialist, I believe, ahead of me. If you are a patient who comes down with any chronic disease, or even if you come down with a rare disease, you got to do your own homework. You got to be your own advocate. Do not listen to your run-of-the-mill practitioner. And they may be wonderful doctors who are good for the run-of-the-mill minor stuff that people get, but they're not good at preventing chronic disease. Number one, third-party payers, you have to spend time with patients to do this. They're not being paid to spend time with patients, so they can't give you an hour lecture on lipids or whatever else. So there's a lot of handicaps that are out there for them. But be your own advocate. There are any number of societies you can Google and find out about that. It will give you legitimate, by the way, the Lp(a) patients, the 1 out of 5 out there, Family Heart Organization. Google them, please. They have a whole Lp(a) section. Clinicians join the National Lipid Association. Across the pond, join the European Atherosclerosis Society. Endocrinologists, read your lipid guidelines and your endocrine society guidelines. Diabetologists, please read the ADA guidelines. Stop believing what you were taught 20 years ago. It's passed you by. That's all I have to say. But wow. I so appreciate you giving me a little platform here. And I hope a lot of people are going to say, whoa, I'm going to demand an ApoB and an Lp(a) on my next physical.
I love it. And we're going to launch some services, more comprehensive services for our clients. And it's going to have a health and wellness and longevity angle to it. I'm going to inquire to see if we can create some sort of if the capacity is there for early medical to be involved. I just think it's such if people were aware of this more, I think it's something that many more people would take action on. And so
yes.
Thank goodness for people like yourself.
This is not rocket science, anything I told you today. I'm sure I hit you hard and heavy with some medical terms, but this is easy stuff.
When you and Peter talk about this stuff, I mean, I can't understand half the things you're saying, but you are, if you're not the world's most renowned expert on lipids, you are absolutely the best communicator. You've done a great job on that, Tom, and hope to meet you someday.
Please follow me if you're a medical professional on LinkedIn, or anybody else can. I've got over 40,000 followers on X, Twitter. It's at Dr. Lipid.
That's
and
right.
All I tweet about is lipid stuff, not anything else.
Here's Three's company too. Come and dance on our floor. Take a step that is new.